and it's in a floodplain, so, I mean, if you're gonna build anything there, it's gotta be FEMA standards.
This is crazy talk, we're not gonna sell it.
Yeah.
No, you have to decide whether you're willing to spend
First of all,
$500,000.
it's part of the attraction of people, that the value of the homes, you could argue, be there. Listen, I don't use it either, I got one in my backyard, but I think it's invaluable to the young kids in the borough. And I get that Wyomissing Hills has their own private pool, I was a member of that for many years, but there are, from what I understand, a good number of people who live in the hills who are members of the Wyomissing pool too.
That's like
Just
saying,
a lot of money.
I understand that.
that's like saying you take out the stone house too.
But what some of it can come down to though is, are the, if you raise the rates,
Yeah,
help
we
to
can raise the
cover it
rates.
by the if you charge user fees, will it discourage use? Will you have then a reduction in use if it gets, you're not gonna cover all of it, but if you increase the fees for use.
For
you
the
help
300
offset.
members,
Either between $300 to $400, 400 memberships.
What do they pay?
We just up the rate, so I think it's like 125 for one or two, and then depending on, on top of that, it increases incrementally. We did raise the fees in 21 or 22, and there was a lot of kickback.
You have a lot of people that use that pool that went to Swainson, that don't necessarily belong to the pool, you don't have to.
No, pool membership's required to be a member of this one.
yeah,
Does it?
we changed that.
I think the only other option there is to maybe have a conversation with West Riding or another surrounding municipality about, hey, how's your pool doing and would it make sense for us to combine, but,
Now, so you're gonna stick a lazy river between, well, we do have a lazy river between here and there, yes, right? That's not gonna work either.
Moving on with,
I admire the thought, but
recreation improvements, 3 courts were previously refurbished, this would be, the remaining 3, for $45,000. A new ice machine at the snack bar and retrofitting the, PA system at the pool.
Do we still get any money from the school for tennis court improvements?
yeah, we split that.
You split it, right?
No, we paid the full rate last time.
They pay a portion of for that contract. It's offsetting years, who pays, and we invoice them,
So this year they'd be on the hook.
but only for a portion of it.
It's always been shared, or it has been for a while.
yeah, but we, when they made the courts, the football field, pickleball courts for the residents, there was some other side deal made that was not as big of a deal.
Alright.
Which, by the way, if you go by those pickleball courts, they're not like the West Reading pickleball courts, but there's a lot of people using the pickleball courts. I can't tell you if they're residents, but
Under park improvements, the forest stewardship study, I believe that RFP is out there now.
Correct.
That cost has been adjusted. It was originally budgeted at 20, the more realistic cost is closer to 40. A new roof at the quarry pavilion and benches throughout the park system. Under parks equipment, we've already talked about the mower. There is an issue with the fuel pumps and the fuel tanks.
I could talk about fuel pumps for a minute. When we built the addition to the park barn last year, we have 2 above ground, they're small tanks, above ground tanks, I think they're 300 gallons apiece, diesel and gas. And we had to move them or take them out of service while they were building the building. We need to put them back now. So that $8,000 is to reconnect and remove the existing pumps. But there's a bigger issue that's really just come up recently. Over at the garage, there's 2 underground tanks, one for diesel, one for gasoline, and a pump for each one. And the diesel pump has a gremlin, what I'm gonna call a gremlin. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We've used B&F Petroleum and Hafer Petroleum, and I'm guessing 6, 7 service calls, and it still is a gremlin. So, and it scares me going into leaf season, because during leaf season, we're burning diesel with the pickers and the trucks all day long. Greg got a price on a new pump, I'm gonna call it $50,000. I'd prefer, if we could, to act on this now with the hopes of before leaf season gets too heavy, that we could get fuel that we can trust. Right now, we could go over there now and the diesel pump might not work, might work. And nobody can figure it out.
And what's the price, 50,000?
50 grand for what we think is as a gas pump. You know, we keep the unleaded, the gasoline one works, it's just the diesel.
How quickly would that be available?
2 weeks, 3 weeks.
But that's not in here.
No.
Now, this really, this came to a head in the last
It's
week.
not part of the 8.
Yeah, no,
It's an addition to the 8.
And I'd like to spend that money this year unbudgeted, if we could, because it's not a good situation. Even during a snowstorm, you know, if we have a snowstorm, we need fuel, so.
And next item is a brush hog, and I'm sorry, I don't have any information on that.
This one's kinda iffy, our foreman, park foreman requested this. I'm not clear on his exact request, and he's off this week, so I couldn't talk to him. So I need time to clarify that.
We've already talked about the welder and the generator. And I think that's all parks equipment. The water project is planned for Old Mill to Oriole and Far.
This would go from museum, up Old Mill, hang a left on Oriole, up to Far Road. We've had quite a few water main breaks there over the last few years.
The balance of the pump station that has not been paid for during '23 is budgeted for next year. There's been just one payment app, and I believe the project is on hold until the pumps are delivered, are anticipated at the end of the year. So that payment will likely fall into '24.
Where is the, what's the other project over there?
West Lawn Intersection?
Yeah, West Lawn Interceptor, where's that?
That's under reserve list.
It's on the reserve list because there is grant funding pending, and until that funding is received, the project won't proceed. So that would be an item that we would revisit at the time funding is awarded. But the amount originally budgeted, plus the $300,000 received from the Highlands, is part of the overall reserve.
So at this point, if we receive that funding, we would need no new revenues for 2024 for it?
Assuming we put it out to bid and it comes in at what we think it's going to, which is the 1.3, 1.4 price.
But we have that coverage between reserves and funding.
If we get the funding, yes.
Okay. And if we don't get the funding,
We could probably kick the can for another year and try and reapply again. I mean, the Highlands has no issue coming online with the temporary pump gym that was put in over there. So, I mean, the biggest time crunch we were under is allowing, as the Highland constructs the new apartment units, allowing them to come online and connect to that system. With the pump that's currently in place, there's not been any overflow issues, which means we're not in violation of DEP.
but they're not up and, they're not, residents aren't in those new.
No, but even when they are, there shouldn't be an issue in the immediate future. It was really in high rain events, and they've made some other changes with fixtures and things that they're putting in there.
Yeah, that West Lawn Interceptor is at capacity, but it can handle day-to-day sewage, but when it rains,
But what about all the new apartments and stuff that are building?
it'll still, it doesn't concern me. It concerns me during a rain event.
So as long as they don't flush the toilets.
And
during the rainstorm.
technically, it's not our pipe, it's Spring Township's pipe. But,
That agreement,
we have an agreement that maintenance on that is on us, because we contribute a lot of sewage to it. So if it overflows, Spring Township reports it, we don't.
So the budget has no cost for that included, but it continues to be reserved.
Right.
An additional $400,000 is planned for the annual televising and repair, and there's an additional additional project for Woodland Road, and Jim has some photos for that.
My graphics aren't that great, but, that's Woodland Road there. Let me stand up here. I'll go up here. This is the mall, this is, the Woodland Plaza Apartments. This is the manhole that we just replaced. When the Berkshire Boulevard pump station pumps, it's in a closed pipe all the way till it gets to here at the crest of the hill, then it goes gravity. From last year's televising work, this is a 8-inch clay pipe, this run. This is an 8-inch clay pipe. This is a cast iron pipe that is barnacle. We'll show you a picture of it. And this run has 2 pretty good holes, cracks in it. Once it gets to here, it's 10. This was replaced some years ago, and it's 10-inch plastic. So I'd like to replace from here to here with new 10-inch plastic, as opposed to 8-inch choked off cast iron pipe and a really bad section of broken pipe. We have some pictures.
Where is the, go back to where we had to fix emergency wells the other day? Was it last year?
No, we just
Didn't
did
they fix
that,
something on Google?
we just did that.
Just
I know, I
the
said, didn't we have to
Yeah,
fix it?
that's State Hill. The manhole was State Hill.
No, it's on Woodland.
It was just on.
No, we just did a manhole replacement where that force main comes into that.
Well, there was a crack in the sewer pipe somewhere.
Yes, that's complete.
Where was that?
That was this manhole right here.
I thought there was something down here closer to the old mobile station that we had to do.
Oh, that was 2 years ago,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
And we did that, that was completed, yeah.
And what kind of pipe was that?
That was 8-inch clay pipe also.
Okay. There was some fun stuff.
So you see, like, it's hard to see, but there's a big chunk that's ready to fall out here. Next. You can see here, it's so hard, that when the pump station kicks on, it's 2/3 full, that pipe, hence it should really go from an 8 to a 10, because when it's pumping, it's getting some restriction because the pipe's too small.
Is 10 enough?
Yes, 10 is enough. And this is the cast iron pipe. Why there's one section of cast iron, I don't know, but it's really barnacled up and might as well be a 6-inch. And that's showing the level of not much headroom left when it's running.
Good one, thank
This is not associated with State Hill Road. At some point if you could stay right there at the barnacle one. Yeah, that one. When the State Hill Road project gets to the next phase, the whole sewage run from Greenwood Mall down to the 222 overpass looks just like that. And before they do that road, we want to replace all that pipe. But hopefully the state will assist in the cost of that, because we're doing it as preventive maintenance as part of their road work. I don't know, we don't know how that's gonna pan out yet, and that'll be 2 or 3 years down the road. But this one I'd like to do next year.
So Michelle, obviously, that we're exhausting any possible revenue in offsets for any kind of funding for any of these projects. And there's nothing positive to add to this in terms of we think we get funding for this or that, or
I mean, the biggest issue right now is the state doesn't have a finalized adopted budget themselves, so all grant awards are on hold. The CFA hasn't met since June, because they don't know what they're doing. So our H2O PA grant application, which is for the Westland Interceptor, is on hold. Our Greenways and Trails applications are on hold. Our LSA, which are for the fire truck, which isn't even in here, or we talked about it. I mean, they're in, but everything's on hold.
so there's nothing that we can look at on this.
Oh yeah, H2O PA, and there's a couple other ones we could do for the sewer work. but they're not gonna open the new programs until they deal with the applications they're already sitting on.
I guess the question is, are there any of these that we look at and say we won't do unless we get funded?
I haven't included them. So the total capital projects built into the budget, total 9.7 million. 4.1 million in revenue is anticipated. That's just two pieces, the proceeds from the note to cover the garage construction and the funding for the stone house. Those are the only two pieces where we actually can reasonably anticipate revenue for the next year. So the net of funding is 5.6 million. 1 million of that is already reserved, so it would be a balance of 4.5.
Is the Stone House project completely funded by the state?
Yeah.
80/20.
We have a balance of 129,000.
Which you already have, you already reserved that.
We reserved it in 23 and it continues to be reserved at the beginning.
Now, keep in mind, that has not been put out to bid yet, and I would assume if those bids come in over budget, you're gonna reject them.
Right.
We want to look at the assumptions that are built into the budget. I've used the consumer price index for the last 12 months released in September. For September is running at 3.7%. With an abstract released on Friday the 13th, our current real estate values total $1,060,000,000. We have not seen the results of the regular appeals scheduled through September and October, so that number could be reduced. Using the $1,060,000,000 at the current tax rate of 4.5, collectible tax for total $4,774,000. We're currently experiencing a collection rate just over 98.5. That would yield $4,700,000, and that is the amount that I have budgeted for 24. If we were to consider a tax increase at the current assessed value, each 1/10 of a mil would generate additional revenue of $106,000. A full millage increase would generate an additional $1 million. I have some information about tax rates in surrounding communities as well. The water rates and the sewer rates were increased for 23. Everything went up by 8%. Have some information about those rates in surrounding communities. Wyomissing seems to be right in the middle of the pack right now
Which we are gonna pass on the full, we're gonna add that back in,
for the water.
correct?
Yes. Emergency services, our contract with the county will have an increase tied to CPI, but that won't be available until December. For the 23 year, the $24,000 for the fire fee was paid for by the Relief Association, and I have not budgeted an amount for the fire department for 24, with the hope that the Relief Association would pay that again. Is that a reasonable assumption, Bill?
It is, we're waiting for the state, you know, to, supposed to be, by the end of the year, redoing the regulations for disbursement of relief funds. So, we don't, it's being proposed that it could be run by a municipality, but it's not.
But you think we
definitely
can get reimbursement for that one portion of it again?
I don't see why they would change that, you know, hopefully.
I have some history here on the overhead rates. They were last increased in 2022. Keep in mind that any change to the overhead rates does not affect the bottom line. There's money coming from the utility funds to the general fund.
I think you're gonna have to do something there, if you're in a deficit of the general fund, we're gonna have to do something with the overhead rates, not that it's gonna change the bottom number,
Does
but.
not change the bottom
An
number.
example though is that the refuse fund is really only underwater by $130,000. The reason it shows 330 on this budget is because we're taking 200,000 of its transferring it every year. Because it used to always have a surplus.
Right, but at the same time, we did not pass along, we know that that's gonna continue to
We've
grow.
almost passed along all of it. That's what I'm saying. The reason your refuse fund is showing a deficit of 330 is because you're taking $200,000 out of it. It would only be showing a deficit of 130, which is the 10% increase on the rate.
Correct,
If you increase the rate 10%, you'll have covered everything, but not the overhead transfer.
right. We don't know what that rate, we don't know what that full amount is from last year, I don't remember what the deficit was.
I'm just looking at this year's.
Yeah.
It shows 330,000 is the deficit in refuse. 200,000 of it is because we take the money to transfer.
Part of that's a legitimate,
It is,
Transfer.
because there's
Well, it's
no
legitimate,
direct,
and we absolutely need to offset the general fund with those things. We
Right.
can't do it with only the taxes.
right? So, your
the
point,
overhead,
But we've already passed along the cost of the increase to people. Now we're talking about passing along the cost of general government to cover the overhead transfer. It's just-
passed along the entire cost of increase, I don't think we did that.
Within 135 hours, which is about 10%, has not been passed along. All you gotta do is look at the fund balance on that, the breakout sheet.
the overhead transfers are intended to cover the indirect costs.
Right.
There are no wages charged to the refuse
Right.
fund, however, there are staff time spent
Right.
for that. Part of those operations, there's general insurance coverage and so forth.
Right.
So, there is a legitimate purpose for the
Right.
base, right,
I was involved when we started using them to help keep taxes down and offset those things. Because people don't recognize increases in fees as much as they do increases in taxes.
Right.
That's why we were able to double it last year, and I don't think we had too much outcry. We did.
My phone was ringing for the first 2 weeks, and this bill's.
Are there any suggestions on additional overhead transfers to make for draft two?
so what's the water and sewer balance that we can? Well, we don't know what the effect's going to be when we add on the increase that Western First is passing on.
Correct. So we'll revisit that?
Yeah, I think we'll have to.
All right. The budget includes the
So we'll
one.
just do a projection as to where the fund balance will be,
Mhm.
and then we can look at the transfers.
Okay.
Not because that won't change, well, it will change the bottom line in terms of,
It will change the respective
right,
respective fund.
well,
fund
it'll change the
balances.
bottom number here as well.
It does not change the bottom number.
If we pass on a 12% increase,
That
that will
will
change
help.
the number,
Yes.
right?
The street work includes 8 roads identified. I've used in draft one the original estimate provided by the engineer. That included engineering, which has been backed out, which is budgeted on a separate line. It also includes a 15% contingency. We have reduced that contingency when budgeting for the past at least 2 years, and we have not been caught short. Final quantities have come in less than originally estimated, so we would have the opportunity to reduce that contingency. That would save $128,000 in our budget for that category.
Yeah.
Every year's different. This year we came in under, it just wasn't as much, we put in the bid package a certain amount of base repair. That was the one this year, and there wasn't needed, so we didn't use it. So we got lucky this year.
Maybe get lucky next year.
Maybe getting lucky next year.
So right now, what's in the budget, 15%?
Right now, the 15% contingency is built into the budget for the street work of $1,376,000.
I would suggest you leave the contingency in, but look at eliminating 1 or 2 projects.
Okay.
If I were to eliminate anything on there, it would be the first one, Buckingham, just because it's a cul-de-sac. Road's in bad condition, but it gets no traffic. But it's not good, so that would be $200,000. And then I guess Trent Avenue. It's Trent Avenue from right up here to Penn Avenue.
Which Trent would that be, or both?
But if we're doing them, we're doing them together there. And that would be, so what, 200, that's 300,
Almost.
280.
almost half a million.
Yeah.
From Fairview to the Penn Avenue,
Yeah.
would be 300,000.
Well, one's 136 and one's, now that could come in less, that, I think that had a lot of curb work in it, in that number. And I went out and looked at the curb, and it's borderline, and I'm not gonna mark up as much curb as I thought I originally would.
Suggested changes? Reduce contingency or remove streets, or both?
Well, I mean, so this year, we didn't use any of the contingencies in any of the projects?
Well, contingency is just a change order.
Right.
And,
We just approved a change order.
yeah, but that was a consolidation
That was
change
to
order.
reduce final quantities.
Yeah, so it actually.
No, we were
Drop
we were under on quantities, there was nothing that made the price go higher.
So why don't we take a chance and just reduce it from 15 to 10? Is that reasonable?
Yeah, and if you wanna remove one street, I would say we could postpone Buckingham, that would be the one I would pick.
Hey, why don't we do that? Why don't we take the contingency down to 10 and take one street out?
And keep Trent on the radar.
For the next budget meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, it can be
We're
very,
actually,
Yeah, I don't see that one's bad right
when you look at that, it's,
now.
if you're actually having conversations about where to put new buildings, can Trent and Fairview become possibilities? Why would you want to pave them in the middle of discussions about what are we doing with this place and how does it affect the roads next to it?
Well, if we did this next year, we're not gonna be doing anything probably through next year. Or,
He's saying if you're doing a construction project potentially here, why would you wanna repave the surrounding streets if you're
Right.
gonna trucks
So we're
on?
ready to do all that.
but that would be done way before we made a decision on this building, I would think. But
Trent Avenue wouldn't have
But the
anything
amount
to do
you
with
put
this
into
building.
the street is,
No, he's saying if they did that with the police section and everything else.
or at least
You're
wait
right.
until you
Yeah,
say
wouldn't
you're
have
not
to
doing
do that.
Well,
anything.
Trent's not here.
No, Trent's.
No, Trent's right up here, right.
Jim just said they have nothing to do.
That would have
Right.
an effect, they'd be that Fairview Avenue anyways.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what,
Well, I don't know if there's any effect, that's all I'm saying.
doesn't sound like
No,
anything
I
we
don't
do
think
here
so.
would affect
No.
Trent and Fairview.
Fairview, because it's right here.
Yeah, it's right up the street, yeah. So,
Where's Buckingham again? Oh, that's the one right
Right off
behind.
Simsbury or East, what
That's
is
the
it?
one that's off, right behind the Ohio Shalom.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a cul-de-sac, has like 20 houses on it.
Yeah.
Darling.
But there's
They
weeds,
don't
there's
want
weeds
that.
growing out of
They
that
probably
street.
don't want, I know people, a lot of people live on that street, they're probably thinking if I move, they won't be able to use their street for a certain period of time.
It's always a hassle, but, no, they'd be able to get in and out. It's just a mill and overlay.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't we put that one on hold for now, and we'll revisit Trent
When we come back to the next time.
back
So
next
remove
week.
Buckingham and reduce contingency to 10%.
Yes.
It's not 255,000.
So what other increases did we anticipate for this year that are within our control? Pension, John?
Can we talk about the construction project here?
Sure.
This is the last one here. What I've done, or Jim's contacted some of the contractors to see what we can expect to incur this year. The balance is planned for next year. One small payment is expected from Bolton, along with the Berkey administration. So in addition to the 262 has already been advanced on the note, an additional 270 is expected to be advanced to cover additional costs to be incurred this year. So I've taken the 262 plus the 270, so revenues include $5 $532,000 in proceeds from debt. The balance is expected next year, both in terms of cost and revenue.
So how are you time phasing how did you budget for the interest for the note?
I guessed
Okay,
at timing, but I think Michelle and I reviewed it. I think I planned a little bit ahead of what might actually occur, so I'm not caught short with interest. For
okay.
the current year, just at $1,200 is expected, because we've already.
2023.
Right, we've already advanced to 262. There'll be an interest payment due on that on November, first week of November, or the first week of December. I'm not quite sure what that due date will be. For next year, I plan to spend the remaining 3.6 million with heavy Bolton costs towards the first quarter, and then the other contractors coming in after that.
Okay.
So by the end of the year, all those costs are incurred, times the accumulated balance and the number of days and the interest rate that we have.
And what are your assumptions then for interest income?
Interest income, where we'll exceed over 600,000 this year, I've dropped it to 500,000 for next year.
So what do you estimate this interest cost to be? Oh, is it on there?
Yeah. Bottom line.
Okay.
Bottom right-hand corner.
Yeah, I can't see.
108.
I can't, I don't have my paper here. 108, okay. So within the body of all of this is the offset interest income,
There is interest income less than the current year,
right?
and there is an interest expense that has been budgeted.
So, I mean, nobody's gonna guess what the interest rates are gonna be for next year, but all indications are there's no rate cuts coming anytime.
Ron suggested there would be small. So we're,
Interest in here, quarter point.
That, do you think the Fed's gonna cut the interest rates
that's what
next
Ron's
year?
indicated last week.
May have heard through the bank.
When it's done
Really?
and we get reimbursed, what's the outstanding amount that we have to finance?
The 2.4 is small.
Yeah. And when would we have to have, so this is like a
25.
bridge loan or a
the-
short-term loan?
The note expires April 1st of 2025.
Okay.
We can apply for our reimbursement as soon as we occupy the building. So that the certificate of occupancy must have been issued.
And when's
So
that
there's an-
anticipated?
December 24.
So there's a few months between when we occupy and when the balance is due on the note.
But that-
Or the
the
note.
risk there
And then
is
we have a
if you're-
$2.4 million balance to finance, but in this current budget, we're just paying for it.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, that's an option at that point. Could we then go to
Could we
long-term
finance?
financing for
Right.
the 2.4? Or the current anticipation is just to pay it off based on our reserves.
As the expenses come in over the course of the project, we're gonna draw on that. note
Yes.
to pay.
Correct.
Yes.
Then we're gonna have reimbursement, and then we're gonna have, so why are we showing $3.6 million of expenses?
And revenue.
Because the way it's
You
gonna
have the
occur.
revenue, you have revenue showing for drawing on the note?
Yes.
Okay.
And also, we're anticipating it's gonna be later in 25. I did follow up with our grant writer as to your comment about Albernia. She did say that, yes, it is a slower reimbursement with RACP, but her assumption is Albernia couldn't have been the prime grantee. They would have had to have gone through a municipality, likely the city of Reading, meaning that submitting for reimbursement requests would have taken much longer than it will for us.
Because the risk's gonna be that the project gets completed in December, our note expires in April, and we will not have received the
Reimbursement.
full reimbursement, or the $1.7 million reimbursement.
Pretty good risk.
Which means at that point, it's not 2.4, it would actually be, do we
4.1.
do we finance 4.1? Which would be an option.
I'm unclear if a motion is required for each and every advance that's made.
Well, that's what Chris was
Chris.
saying, that he didn't think we needed to.
He
So we said we
wanted
could do-
one based off of me adding it to my manager's report for this council meeting.
So
He
the-
does, for clarity purposes, he does want a motion for every advance.
Oh, okay.
So the advance would follow council's approval of the payment act for the large payments to contractors. So that timing would work. I wouldn't be able to advance to cover the soft costs. We would have to accumulate them and include them with any payment act approval that
On a monthly basis.
we could do that on a monthly basis.
Why?
So I anticipate an invoice from Berkey for a prorated portion of October. So I should receive that invoice sometime early November. So I can either accumulate those costs until the first construction act comes in, or we could add that to the November,
Yeah,
Or council or
why wouldn't you do it
infrastructure.
just like any other bill that comes in, goes to council, whenever council meets?
I mean, I can do it under my manager's report of the timings. Not gonna work to make the infrastructure and delay another capital.
so I won't advance until I receive approval. And I'll give you a list of what's being covered. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it'd be different than any other invoice that comes in.
Well,
Okay,
typical,
typical
Operating
invoices you guys don't see.
yeah,
Right.
you see them after the fact.
Is timing gonna be a problem? I mean, do we need to ratify?
Well, no, I mean, the worst case that you're gonna be out 30 days or so, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we would fund it with operations until which time council approves the advance, and then I would bring those funds back into the general fund.
so pensions, we
Correct.
increased that $600,000.
I do have pension information. At this point, the projection for 2023 has the middle of the road, the option 2, where the fourth quarter contribution will be what's needed to fulfill the MMOs, but not the full amount received for state aid. So is that the?
So as we have done in the past, would be, we would
We would do,
contribute all the state aid plus what our normal contribution
Yes.
was budgeted for.
yes, that is what we've done in the past.
Right.
But, the first draft has option 2, where we're just contributing what's needed for the MMO. So would you like me to up the fourth quarter contribution for the current year?
So you're saying option 2 currently is the MMO with the state aid, but not the full amount that we budgeted for that we anticipated Wyomissing to pay.
Right. The difference being that the fourth quarter contribution needs to be made. We can either make 20, or we can make 69.
And currently, you're saying that the bottom line numbers are option number 2, not option number 3?
Correct.
Okay.
Payment out, payment
No, I think as in past practices, we have to do option number 3.
Okay. I will make that adjustment in our projection.
Which is what we budgeted.
Correct. Net of the increase, it increases what we're contributing based on the increase that we got from the state. Right. It's not adjusting what we budgeted.
I will make that adjustment for draft 2, and then we'll need to approve that at the next finance committee meeting.
I think we have to talk about the 600,000 that we added back into the 2024 budget.
That's the next one. All right. Draft number 1 has an MMO contribution of 1.4 million, 1.490. Already approved is what's highlighted in yellow. Council approved that in September as required at 837.
For 2024.
Yes. Draft 1 includes the 1,490,000.
I mean, we know we're gonna be liable for that in 2024. My personal opinion, I don't see us putting it in for 2025. we know we're gonna be liable for 2025. And I think we just have to look at what we can afford for 2025, and maybe it's gonna require some financing when we get to Public Works or whatever we're gonna do the administration building. But the dollars just aren't here to put in.
The debt that we have in place is specifically for construction. It cannot be used to make pension payments.
Oh, no, I'm not
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not going there, I'm not even going there. I'm just talking about preserving some cash. John?
Just what you just said, the dollars aren't there to do that. If this is the extra isn't a requirement, but the pension is a requirement. Maintaining it fully funded is a requirement. Paving two of the other streets are the options. It's the only lever you can pull, because you don't do as many projects. We got what's the 4.7 million of reserve? Projects we reserved that haven't happened?
Correct.
Well,
Including
wait,
the Public
wait.
Works
At some
garage.
point, you have to let them happen and not keep adding new ones to it.
But no, wait, some of that's the Public Works building that we already decided to do.
The majority of that
The
is.
majority of that is the Public Works building, so the shovel's in the ground, it's not like we're not postponing it, those are real dollars that are going out next year.
But how would we look at this entire budget if we just made the decision that we're gonna finance that, and that it's not gonna hit the reserves, and that our genuine shortfall is a number much lower, that we now need to raise fees, taxes, and reduce expenses to justify? We're looking at a number that's twice as big as I think it needs to be. Are we gonna, we're gonna finance the building?
No, we don't know that, we haven't decided to do that. We're only financing it on a short-term basis till April of 2025. There's been no decision made on long-term financing. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. We can certainly have that, but we've not had that discussion. And we didn't go into the Public Works building with the anticipation of financing it. The original decision was made to the point of, we're carrying all these reserves, we're not gonna raise taxes, so we're gonna we're gonna reduce some of our cash reserve that we've been carrying balances for all these years, and start using it for projects that need to be done, like the Public Works building. So there was no decision made on long-term financing, and the only reason we're doing any kind of financing is because we fell into the opportunity of 2 years ago taking on this note at 2.95%. That was a 4-year note or 5-year note? What was the original term? 5 years, I think. I think it was good for 5 years, 60 months or something. And we got lucky in that we, against my objections, actually, I didn't want to do it. We spent the money to do the legal fees and so on, and just have the money sit there. In retrospect, it worked out great, because we're gonna bank the 2.4% difference in interest between the 2.95 and 5 point whatever we're gonna get from Pliget or from VIST or whoever it's gonna be. So that's the only reason we're doing any financing, otherwise it would all be coming out of the reserves.
But we can't do that.
We can't do what?
The reserves are there for the exact reason.
But the point
They're there
was,
for the rainy day, which it just came.
the point was that the reserve, and I think Greg Porter was always making the point that we were keeping too much in reserve. We were raising taxes,
I disagree with it,
okay?
because we're gonna go through it here in 2 years. It wasn't meant for that.
Well,
Wasn't meant for what?
It wasn't meant to blow through it like this. It's not meant for huge capital projects. The reserves in the waterfront and the sewer fund were meant for capital projects in those funds. And we've been able to pull from those funds to help offset general revenue. But we're at a point where you have to be looking at the revenue side, and you have to cut some service, or project. And because fixing some of the things that we wanna fix to make our borough nice are optional. Funding the pension is not optional.
to the level of the funding is optional. And
The $600,000 is optional.
Is it not?
It is. And then
it won't be in 2025.
2 years, you'll be at the level that's distressed, at 70%. Or worse.
I mean,
especially because you're adding people into the system.
well, and the actuaries are already considering that. They're taking the actual payroll and they're making those assumptions based on what he said the other week. I mean, he's looking at the ages and he's doing all of those things, and that's all going into the factor of where we need to be.
The MMO was prepared before a decision was made to add the firefighter and the 2 police officers.
Yes.
That was not known information at the time the MMO was computed.
I don't disagree, but I think we're putting money into it in anticipation of being worst case scenario.
But we do kind of know the worst case scenario is coming next year because it took a picture last year.
I'm talking about the fluctuation of the market.
No, I get it, I understand your point.
Right.
Because
I think
we
it's
already
something-
recovered.
I think, you know, when we get to the next round of the budget, I think it's something we have to look at and say, if we wanna put the full 600,000 in,
Right.
we can do some
I
portion
don't
of the
disagree with that.
$600,000.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what we've done in the last hour and a half is we've probably added back in $2 million to a $300,000 balance. We added probably $2 million by cutting out a street, by taking the $800,000 out of the admin borough hall, by passing on the water increase, by passing on the trash increase.
Right.
We probably added back $2 million. That's still $2 million shy of where we should be if we're gonna keep a $4 to $5 million cash reserve. We're not there.
So how big do you want your emergency service tax to be?
There's a limit on how high you can go with it.
Well, there's a limit on it, and
It's just a real estate tax by another name.
right.
You can see it on our sheet, the historical sheet, where is that, Phyllis? Shows taxes over the years.
Well, that's like the
We
road
used to have a
tax.
road tax.
Used to be the road
And as
tax.
soon as the road tax expired, we raised taxes by 8.9%.
Right.
So more than offset it. Right there in 2019, it expired, the 408. That was to fix the boulevards.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a 10-year thing or more than
Yep,
10?
10-year.
10-year. So we're just gonna add another, we're gonna change that road revenue to emergency services revenue and be able to generate something. Say $500,000, generate $500,000. And raise taxes 10%, that's another $500,000. That's a mill.
That's in the,
A mill will generate an additional $1 million
$1 million is a
at
mill.
our current.
Mill.
Depends on what you call it, you know, where you want to put it. But a mill is 22% tax increase.
right, it's a big number.
And again, there's a $500,000 sitting there going into the pension funds that if I have a choice between rolling the dice as to what the market's gonna do and adding more money to the pension fund in case the market takes a shit, I'd rather not put that in than raise taxes. I don't wanna raise taxes to put money in the market.
But you can take out of the equation the fluctuation in the market. You really can.
Well, but then if you're gonna take out the fluctuation in the market, why are we gonna go from 800,000 to 1.4 million? Because that's totally based on the fluctuation of the market. Because a one picture at a time, at the end of 2022, the market was way down. We've already recovered all the losses plus 6%, but we're still gonna put another $600,000 into the pension because of that one blip in time. We've already recovered it all. We're not in a distressed situation anymore. We got all the money back from the losses in 22, and we're up 6% year to date. And now we're gonna throw more money in it because the market might take another shit. That doesn't make sense to me. I can't,
But the whole actuarial table is based on an assumption, on an assumed rate of return, which we have lowered intentionally to get to be more realistic. And that's gonna do what it's gonna do.
I know, and the risk that you take is that 10 years from now, we didn't put enough in, and we're gonna have to dig in to supplement the pension fund by $100,000. I'd rather put $100,000 in 10 years from now than $600,000 next month.
Except it won't be that, it'll be millions.
Yeah, probably be a
It'll
little.
go, it will continue to go into distressed territory over time.
Just
Because
like,
the market doesn't return 7%, we've lowered it to that to try to get closer to what the market returns. The market returns more like 5 to 6%, so you're always falling behind.
I question whether, I don't know the number. If you're quoting that number,
What does an endowment spend so that they don't touch principal?
I don't know.
They always spend 4% because the market returns about 5.
I don't
That
know
was the issue with
historically.
all the pensions in the first place. That's the move for reducing the assumed rate of return, was because everyone was using ridiculous rates of return assumptions. They were using 9 and 10% rates of return. And so they were funding MMO based on a return that was never happening. 7 still doesn't really happen in a balanced investment.
I don't know. I
I
don't
think
know
we can let-
historically.
Take some of it out. Take all of it out if you want to take it out, and we'll look at the next graph.
Well, I think that's exactly what we're doing. We're saying, we know that that's there, and decide what to do with it.
But I need to understand, I don't understand it because I'm not a finance guy, but how does the fact that we're not assuming we're gonna finance the building affect the reserves? Like if we decide we're gonna finance the building, don't we maintain reserves?
Yes.
Because then we have an annual expenditure of it's gonna be about $250,000 a year in expense to finance a note over 20 years. I don't know what you take it out of, what would you do with building? Is the building out over 10 years?
I don't know, depreciate.
Yeah, what is
I
it
would
like,
guess.
if we took that note, how far could we go, like 20 years?
Well, no, that's a whole nother,
That's a whole different.
that note's not optional.
Like a mortgage.
That's a short term,
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a short term, it's not even called a line of
It's
credit, it's a
construction loan.
bridge, it's a construction loan.
It's a
bridge-
general
it's a bridge loan.
obligation.
When you go to
Okay.
do a building loan, it might be on a shorter term, so that might be $500,000 a year, but still, it's,
Not millions.
then we don't completely deplete the reserves.
Yeah, we could certainly look at that, we can certainly look at that.
Those plans do not affect the 24 budget.
Right, so I was
It
thinking
only,
that-
it only affects how we perceive the reserve balance.
Right, it won't affect the budget, but it'll affect where we think we wanna end up at the end of 2024 in terms of liability versus, cash reserve.
So what's the negative of saying we're just gonna sort of pull that out of the budget altogether and out of the reserves?
I can pull it out of the reserves. That's gonna take
If we're gonna,
4.7.
we know we're not gonna pay, I think we know we're not gonna pay. We get the 1.7 back, we still owe whatever, we're gonna finance that, we're not gonna.
It wasn't the plan, that was never the plan.
No, I agree, and you're right, it's gonna be a different council, so you never know.
Yeah, I don't know. We can certainly ask, I don't know what the current financing situation is right now. I mean, prime is
It's not good right now.
8.5 or
It's not good.
Right now.
Yeah, but you would probably be a year out from looking at that. Who knows what's gonna happen next
Yeah,
year.
I just ran numbers on 2.5 million at 7%, 7.5%. Over 20 years is $250,000 a year.
principal and interest.
Yeah. Yeah, then you're, I think on any huge expense like that, we have to, the reserves aren't meant for paying for a building. The reserves are meant for fluctuations in the pension and an extra water main that breaks or reserves. They're reserves,
Yeah.
surprises.
So I guess we can make, if we're gonna go that route, then the question is, we really don't wanna do any financing today. We don't wanna do any financing in 2024. because we've got the bridge loan
Right.
at 2.95%. So obviously, we don't want to take out any longer-term debt
Right.
until
The 2.9 turns into 7.
2025.
Right.
I guess the question is, do we make a budget assumption that we're gonna finance $4.1 million, which is the construction cost for the public works building?
Or maybe more.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, yeah, right.
if you're not, if you're using that logic for the public works project, why would you not use that same logic? You're not using your reserves to buy a building, I would think you're gonna use your reserves to completely renovate a building either. So, yeah.
Totally
Absolutely.
agree.
I
Absolutely.
agree too. I still don't understand how it affects the budget though, because I see the revenue on the revenue side for that note.
It
Has
won't
no
affect
That's
the
what
the
they
city.
draw.
expense, but it's affecting the anticipated fund balance.
Correct. It doesn't affect the budget at all.
It's included in the future reserves.
In the future reserves, I got it. All
Yeah, so it doesn't affect the budget, but it
Does not
affects,
affect the 24 budget, it affects the future reserves.
So if we say we're gonna finance it, then you would just change how it affects the future reserves.
I would
Budget doesn't
either pull
change.
it out in its entirety, or,
Leaving your interest payments, but,
well, the interest payment is part of the budget.
Right.
But in
Right,
effect,
it
we
would be
are
adding
financing.
but that's $100,000. It was around 4.7.
But-
Loan.
very
So it's-
short term.
Right, but it's gonna show up in the 2025 budget, not the 2024, right?
No, it's showing up in the 2024 budget.
But we're financing.
Showing it both sides.
There's
It's
a,
showing,
It's in
we're
that.
showing the expense and the revenue. We're showing as if the revenue is offsetting the expense,
yes,
but with an anticipated hit to the reserves.
Right, that's the part that was shocking to me, is that it was like 4.7 in reserves.
Which is 300,000,
Right.
based on paying that note with the current budget, before we took some of these other things out, and before we added back in some of the revenue. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly an option. I mean, and it doesn't change our expenses, other than the things we've already changed,
Right.
but it does change where we think we'll end up, which makes it far more palatable in terms of the conservative. But then we're gonna have to look at the long-term debt expenses.
so would you like the reserves to include or exclude our future
Well,
commitment?
it's pretty easy, it's two numbers, why don't you just give us both numbers? Just,
Well, I would do the second look with,
With it out.
in the future, we know we're gonna finance that.
Okay, then we would remove it.
Just gonna change the reserve number, right?
correct.
It will change the reserve
Right.
number, correct?
Well, it'll change the reserve number, but it'll also change the unreserved fund balance at the end of projection of end of 2024.
Right.
So let's do that and see what it looks like.
Because I have that amount in both the ending 23 and the ending 24 reserve number.
Yeah.
Because construction started, we
Which is
started.
where
with
we started the whole conversation of why we went from 7.9 to
5.
Yes,
whatever. Okay. That's where we started the conversation of why it went from projected of 7.2 to an actual projection of 7.9 down to 5.4.
yes.
So where we started budgeting last year at this time is where we set the number of 7.2.
Correct.
You know, I agree with John that the reserves, that there's some point where you have reserves and free reserves, nothing that's gonna be, I don't know that we really wanted to use that for a $4 million project, but maybe part of it along the line, but I just think that's something you have to finance. And I just think we might as well make that assumption.
I mean,
Otherwise,
John,
we're gonna be doing no streets, no sewer work, no televising, getting very little equipment, and eating it for a year, and then now we're pushing the can down the road on all that stuff.
so when, you know, to your point, John, where you're saying, what are those reserves that we every year just keep carrying over? If you take the public works out of there, now, we know what we've been carrying is this MS4, but we made the conscious decision to build that fund up to $400,000 because we kept getting hit with these expenses that we unanticipated, and we know we're gonna be committed to those dollars. We took whatever we got for the fire truck, $450,000, and we purposely put that into the reserve and said that's gonna go towards the next fire truck, whenever that happens. But beyond that, there isn't really
They're smaller.
over and over and over again of things that we're reserving for that are never gonna happen. You know, take out the fire truck and take out the MS4, but those are conscious $800,000 to $900,000 decisions that
We're pre-planning for.
we're pre-planning for. But beyond that, I don't think we're really doing, I don't think we're carrying too much of things that we're never gonna do. And we've added back in a lot of the things that we said, you know, we had in there for a long time. We had the windows in here, we kept carrying that and carrying that and carrying that.
Right.
And we finally took all of that out. So, I mean, Phyllis, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, I don't know of anything in these reserves that are
Something we don't know.
overinflated numbers that we don't think we're really gonna use at some point in time.
The only thing that could potentially fall in that category is the West Lawn intersection.
It is, but we got $300,000 from Highlands, and I would hate to see us take the $300,000 and throw that into our general fund, knowing that the Highlands gave us that specifically
We
for that
can't-
project.
We can't, there's
Run
an
it into
agreement.
the sewer fund, is that where it would go?
That is a
Or the
reserve
water
in the
fund.
sewer fund. That is not a general fund reserve.
So I mean, there's $950,000 in reserves for the West Lawn intersection, but we know that that's gonna at some point in time come back and bite us for 1.4 million. You know, we're carrying the 950. Is there a justification to add that back in? I don't think so. I think we have to keep that there, because we know that that's gonna happen. It's just a question of when, and I would hate to see us budget around adding back in 950, thinking that's gonna come back to us at the end of an unreserved fund balance, and then the funding comes in from the state, and we gotta come up with $1 million.
Or worse.
The risk you run is overreacting now because you see a declining fund balance that's disappearing because you're reserving for future things. So you raise taxes and raise revenue today because of the feel that it's the panic. You walked in here saying we need a chainsaw, but there's a project on there that we don't know when it's gonna happen, and
It has to happen though. The
It has to.
alternative is the funding doesn't come through, DEP issues a consent order and we must do it.
Right. And I'm not suggesting we raise taxes, I'm not suggesting that. I realize that there's always gonna be a give and take in terms of where we are, but, and maybe some of this solution is some long-term financing like you're suggesting, because maybe what we're overreacting to is we're overreacting to a declining unreserved fund balance where we have some other options from a financial standpoint that make more sense than depleting those unreserved fund balances. And I think it's a good point.
Phyllis agrees with that too. I think we should figure out a way to get personal revenue into the second rec budget though. That's the final thing is the third rail. How much more do you want to raise?
Well,
We talked about raising fees to cover the
Water and
increases.
trash.
Water and trash to cover the increase.
Just the one
And
emergency
for
service
refuge,
tax.
you're talking about building in enough to cover the overhead transfer for refuge. To balance you're gonna raise the fees to balance that fund,
Yes.
so that's 300,000, 330,000.
right.
And water and, is there anything in sewer?
No, there's no increase being paid. Well, there's no JMA increase. The city of Reading has already announced a 12% increase, which will be effective the second quarter of '24. There is no information from spring yet because they're still in their budget
So
process.
should we factor that in as well?
Reading is a small piece of it.
If all this is based on potential problems down the road, and you've got 4 or 5 road projects out there, 8 road projects, I mean, our roads are pretty damn good around here, but we just have this thing about keeping it perfect. If you want, well, they're really good, there's not a whole lot of potholes you run into. You don't drive down the streets of Philadelphia without.
Depends what you're
I
saying.
said you're comparing apples and oranges.
Well,
All right,
part,
okay, so forget
part,
about
part of
that.
the reasons we don't have that is because we're continuing to do this.
Right, fine, but if you're looking at an emergency now, because you have all these crises going on, if you delay 3 roads for $2.5 million for 1 year, and you look at this again next year at this time, nobody's gonna say, God, my car was demolished last year because we didn't do this road project. It's millions of dollars for these roads.
I got you.
If there's, not in regard to the road per se, but, if you said, Jim, you gotta cut something out of all these capital projects, I would say, the water line job, Old Mill Road, and then up Oriole to Far, that could be cut into 2 projects, do half this year, half next year.
How
And that
much
was
is
a $400,000 thing, so we could cut $200,000 roughly. And by dividing that into a 2-year project as opposed to a suit, if that $200,000 helps.
What is the total cost increase because you're not doing it as one project?
It could cost more.
And that's the
Saving
healthiest
money.
fund balance.
What's that?
That's the healthiest fund balance.
What if it's costing us more?
No,
That is what has been done in the past, though. They've come in with 6 to 8 roads, typically try to do about 6 to 8 a year, right?
Well, I always go for that 1.4 number.
Okay. You
That's
shoot for
my
that.
mindset.
Right, and then if you can't, if you feel we can't do it, we cut one
well,
or
we
two.
just cut one.
Like we did, and, but you also then have to be prepared when it's water or sewer, you can't just cut it and then end up with an emergency and pay all the money anyway.
Right.
Which is why you like to have a nice reserve in those funds. Those funds were there for that.
Right.
I think we should just look at, what do you wanna do with an emergency service tax? We wanna really propose to put one in place.
Well, I think that's what we have, I think that's where we're gonna need to talk to Chris, because if we do that, there are guidelines for it that have to be followed in terms of how the dollars can be structured and how the dollars can be used.
I'm supposed to follow up with him after this meeting, so you want an opinion on that as to,
But easy enough without having to call it an emergency service tax. We wanna raise $500,000, $750,000. $500,000 or $750,000. I think we should put something into this budget that includes.
But we know by the numbers, let's do this, and we know by the numbers what the other side of the equation is, right? If it has to be a tax increase, there is. But let's do this part first and then get to that part. Because we'll be able to fill the equation in when we get done with cutting what we're gonna cut and taking out on what we're gonna take out, but then the balance is left is where you want the reserves to be.
That's fine.
Well, it makes a huge difference at the bottom unreserved fund balance if we decide to finance the public works building. I mean, that's huge, because that's where a huge chunk of this went.
Why not use that 2.95%?
But that's only, we are,
Yeah.
We're
right,
going
which
to.
We refinance, right.
But the future
Right, it
reserve
only
goes
goes
down
for
so
a
much
year.
Right,
because
yeah.
we're assuming after that's over, we're gonna gobble the whole thing up.
Yes.
I don't know that we're gonna be in a spot that we should be. Could, how about could, but should be.
right.
I don't know that we should.
I mean, if you look at that, if you look at financing the public works building, assuming we'll take on some longer-term debt in April of 2025, factoring that back in here, your fund balance, unreserved fund balance, even with this budget, after you take some of these other things out, like the $800,000 for the admin and so on, and that street and some of these other things, and the increases, now you're probably closer to $5 million in unreserved fund balance, compared to 300,000, which is probably far more palatable.
That would
But now we just took on $4.1 million of long-term debt.
We bought a
Yeah, the maintenance building's gonna be here for a long time.
Well, the other thing we have to consider is this was supposed to be a stopgap for the longer-term public works building, right, Jim?
Hey, this is a shrunken version of what was originally proposed.
But that got up to $8 million,
Nine.
9.
I have another commitment at 10, but I don't know if this committee can take action or not, but if there could be some sort of decision on if we could do this gas pump,
The diesel.
the diesel pump.
You're gonna have to amend the agenda if you are.
With that 50,000.
Yeah.
And you could do it, just have council ratify it.
Okay. Choice.
Now,
This is what the
Yeah,
reserves are for. John, this is what the reserves are for.
I think I kid with kids if we don't fix
We
it.
had surplus.
What's the protocol in terms of emergency repairs?
That's above my threshold. But, I mean,
We would make a motion to council, or can we approve it?
I think you can, council has to ultimately approve it, but you can approve it and council to ratify it. You can do that.
I
mean,
make a motion.
You got six.
1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4, 5, 6.
First the only one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we need to do?
First, a motion to amend the agenda to take action on it.
I'll
We have a motion and a second to amend the
amend
agenda,
the agenda.
About the fuel pump.
to talk about fuel pump emergency repair.
Right.
He wants to get a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're
Right.
talking about-
Buy a new pump.
Emergency repair.
I make a motion to
He tried
spend,
to repair it 3 times, and it didn't work.
I make a motion to replace.
Now we have,
No,
now we have,
no,
now we
no,
have to
no,
let,
no,
now we have to let Adrian talk.
You're ahead first.
You wanna talk about the fuel pump?
Well, we could, but
Jan, you wanna talk about the fuel pump? Okay, hearing no public comment. We'll have a motion to approve the emergency expenditure to replace the fuel pump for the diesel,
Do we want to
so
set
they
a
can pick the
number?
leaves and plow the snow.
Do we want to set a number on that, 50,000?
Greg, you already had a number, right?
Yeah,
Was it a hard number?
no, it was
I-
an estimate.
I would say 60.
Then, okay, that, yeah, we have to, yeah,
Not to exceed 60.
not to
We have a
exceed,
motion
not to exceed
And a
60.
second,
Second.
all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, Greg, get it for 45.
I'll do my best.
Okay, Phyllis, what else do you need?
Are we putting any type of tax increase in draft two?
It's not complicated, it's the other side of the equation.
I will make
You
those
know,
changes.
one thing we didn't talk about is the potential of the Western Berks EMS thing.
Oh.
Well, if they do the authority, that won't go through our budget.
Sure.
No, it will be a
And
pass.
it's not likely to be that quick. Do you think so?
I don't think
I would
that's.
think end of 24 is the
No.
earliest.
Yeah, I don't think.
But that would be, if they establish an authority, that would just be a pass through our budget.
Meaning we're charging a head tax to people in some way, shape, or form.
Do what?
I mean, we're passing that tax on to every resident in some way,
Well,
shape, or form.
Yeah, we would just be a collection agency for the authority
Correct.
That we created,
that they create.
Well,
that we created.
one of.
We would
one
have to
of-
vote.
Right.
one
We
of-
were one of
so-
9.
Right.
Yeah. I
We
don't
do
think
have a
that's-
contribution built into the budget.
Right.
It's like, what, 50?
Yeah, that's way low though, actually.
Compared to what it would be.
And compared to what it would be compared to other people.
Didn't they say it'd be about 120?
Per resident?
No, 120,000
Total.
overall.
Oh,
Yeah,
they've been $120 per resident, which is
Well,
still
see, that's
astronomical, but.
Is that what it is, $120 per resident?
No,
120,000.
I thought I heard $120,000
we
per
go from
I don't
50
see
to
how that is
120.
per municipality, something like that.
Did they give any type of per person or per household?
Not yet.
estimate?
No.
8:45 next Thursday?
Yeah, I will not be here. On the way to Texas.
8:45.
Yes, I got our economic development.
After-
Oh, that's
after
right,
maybe.
that's right.
Well, I have you here and we're in the public session, this will be, part of my manager's report, but if it works for everybody, the groundbreaking ceremony for the Public Works Garage would be at 11 a.m. on November 20th, which is the day of the November infrastructure meeting. It would not be a public meeting, it would simply be a groundbreaking ceremony with the regular meeting to happen here at 4 p.m.
Motion to adjourn? So moved.
Second.
Check with the planner tomorrow morning, or I could do it today.
They're not-
They have not been run yet.